Today we've raised about 80-something million dollars. We most recently a Series C.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another fabulous episode of the Healthcare Trailblazers Live with the wonderful David West. David, good to see you.
Nice to see you. Thanks
so
for
David,
coming in.
Yes, David is the CEO of a very wonderful AI company called Proscia, a first-generation AI company. You guys have been around a while. This isn't one of those pop-ups after what was it, November of 22. So we're actually here live in the offices, kind of seeing some of the action. Really excited to be here. So David, thanks for spending time with us.
Yeah, thanks so much for coming in. It's great to have you here, and love having folks into our humble abode.
Yeah, not that humble. So, talk to us give us the origin story. What is Proscia, and how did you get into healthcare?
Yeah, so on a personal level, I'm a software guy at heart. My background is in computational biology. I was at Johns Hopkins when I fell in love with the pathology space. I was working with some scientists there who were basically building these computer vision and machine learning algorithms to predict cancer outcomes using what are called whole slide images, basically images of physical glass slides that you would normally look at under a microscope. And I was just fascinated by this idea that we can use computers or computation to understand cancer and other diseases in a way that's very, very different than the standard of care today. For the past 150 years, pathologists have been using these microscopes and physical glass slides to not just diagnose patients in kind of clinical diagnostic settings, but also to deepen our understanding of disease that is helpful for bringing drugs to market, for doing research, et cetera. And I started scratching my head, well, gee, why is there this huge delta between the microscope and what was possible, at least in this very academic setting? And of course, when I talked to pathologists and other folks who worked in these kind of real world laboratory settings, not only were they not using sort of computational approaches or using AI, but they weren't using imaging in the first place. And their challenges were, well, the images are huge. They're a gigabyte per image, so hard to manage, hard to store. And these laboratories are in the business of, delivering value to patients and writing reports and billing for those reports, not necessarily in managing the incredibly complex infrastructure and workflow that comes with operating in a image or data-driven discipline. And so we started very humble origins, building some software that would do the heavy lifting for pathologists and scientists that were working with these images. We put a product out there. It was sort of like, I always describe it as like Google Drive for pathologists.
Okay.
Just a way to make it really easy to manage this huge amount of data. We built this on a modern tech stack with a modern API in the cloud where a pathologist could log in from anywhere and do their work, where they could share cases, and importantly, where we could kind of bring together the best of what the pathologist can do with what machines can do. And that's how Proscia started. We got a couple hundred pathologists and scientists that were using the platform. At first, it was very much, folks that were within my community, academic folks, places like Hopkins, Vanderbilt, and we got, we went out there and raised some money. We raised a seed round back in 2016, and that's when it became my full-time job.
Wow.
So that's the sort of the origin story in a nutshell.
Wow. Okay. So many follow-up questions. So first of all, it sounds like the biggest barrier to entry for even thinking about adopting some of these newer technologies based on what you're talking about is the size of the image file.
Yeah.
That seemed to be a really big hindrance. How'd you solve that?
Yeah. It's these images they're a gigabyte per image, like minimum. Sometimes they go up to like 20 gigabytes per image for some of the high plex images that are coming out onto the market. And so it is a huge infrastructure and logistical and technical challenge. These are not iPhone photos. They're like 40,000 iPhone photos stitched together in special image formats. They're very similar to satellite imagery. Like that's a lot of the technology in early days of digital pathology was based on satellite imagery. So if you can imagine when you're, on Google Maps, when you zoom in, it's sort of, these sort of tiles come together and you can zoom in further and you get higher resolution. That's how these images are structured. You can zoom out and get an understanding for the tissue or the tumor as a whole, and then you can zoom all the way into 40x zoom levels, which is just like a microscope. And there's layers of data that represent higher resolution parts of the tissue or of the image. And so you need special technology software to handle the viewing of these. And in the early days, a lot of what existed out there was basically desktop viewers that came with the scanner. Like that was the standard of the software. And I think that's for me what kind of frustrated me with the landscape, the software landscape was, like there's hardware companies that are investing tons of money into getting into this space. And the software landscape felt like something from 1990. Like you'd download this little application, you'd have it on your desktop, and you could view images from that scanner, but you couldn't view images from any other scanner, let alone be integrating best image analysis and AI tools into that workflow.
Sounds like healthcare.
Exactly. That's healthcare in a nutshell, right? That's what you get. I think I had that thing that a lot of healthcare entrepreneurs, I don't know if this is your feeling, but like you get frustrated by the technology that exists. And so I don't deserve any credit for this. Really, our CTO, my co-founder, who built a lot of the early technology that not only made it really easy to view these images and manage these images, but especially like to do it in the cloud. So we put out this white paper called Bringing Pathology to the Cloud, and our thesis was it's not only hard to manage the data, it's expensive to manage the data, but we have this sort of proliferation in storing compute capabilities on our side. That helps enable digital pathology. It's the foundation that makes digital pathology both scalable and cost effective. And the only way to bring this technology to real laboratories was to leverage the scalability and the cost effectiveness of the cloud. So we built a lot of this proprietary technology that will allow you to stream this data from AWS or whatever cloud you were built on. Now some of our customers use cloud, but we've abstracted that for more complex IT infrastructures. Those were a lot of the early challenges of our technology and for us as a company. But we felt very strongly that if you can make it super fast and easy for the pathologist to view these huge image files without like lagging when viewing them, and really cost effective for the labs to manage this, then that ultimately would be the winning strategy in this space, that we wanted to be the platform where the data lived first and foremost and where the work happened. And then we could start bringing AI capabilities to those workflows.
Yeah, so and that's where I was going next. Is so you've solved the first issue, which is even the possibility, forget AI and machine learning, you've created the possibility for a pathologist to actually view these images in a convenient way on the cloud, share, back and forth, all that, which is great. Which brings to mind, before I jump into the AI thing, how did you deal with, like, were there any HIPAA-related issues? Like just the impossibility of sharing things in a convenient way in healthcare?
We deal with HIPAA. This is a regulated space, so we have two products. And our first product, Pathology Cloud, became what we now call Concentriq for Research. Concentriq for Research is not regulated in the same way that our diagnostic product is Concentriq DX, which is approved for diagnostic use in Europe or the EU via IVDR. So these regulatory agencies regulate the use of not using AI. People always think like, your regulatory work is around AI. No, our regulatory work starts with just being able to view those images in the first place. And for very good reason. There is a reason why the FDA and the EU really cares about making sure that these images in fact represent the underlying biology. That's what they care about. What they care about is, can you scan, once those images are scanned, are they representing exactly what's on that slide that you would see under a microscope? And then when you view that, are those exact pixels? So they talk about the pixel pipeline, right? And we were not the first company to deal with this. The scanner companies were the first ones who had to do these big clinical studies to get this technology approved for diagnostic use. That happened not until 2017. People always ask, why is pathology just going digital now, but radiology went digital 20 years ago, and much of healthcare has been digital for some time? A big part of that is that it wasn't until very, very recently, basically 5 years ago, that any of this technology could actually be used for diagnostic use. That said, what we as a business were able to do is prove out this technology in research settings. So a lot of our early customers were academic research and eventually large pharma and CRO customers. And today those represent a big part of our customer base. I think that's the part of pathology that is often overlooked. Pathology is, when pathology is being used for in clinical settings, like that's the end of this sort of spectrum of pathology. Pathology starts with our early understanding of disease or how new medicines interact with disease. Whether those medicines are safe, we have to use an understanding of tissue to even get those drugs into clinical trials. And so it plays a huge role in R&D. And that doesn't come with all the regulatory compliance burden that we have on the diagnostic side of our business. So for us, from a business perspective, we were able to build a lot of momentum, validate the technology, and validate the business model before getting into the diagnostic space.
Awesome. So where does the machine learning idea come into the picture? Or did you start with that, and then the first step to getting there was just digitizing, or did you start with, hey, let's make this more convenient, and then you realize machine learning is a thing?
Well, from a personal perspective, I think my passion for this really came from the possibilities that come from computation, but it was when faced with the reality of adoption of that technology that we realized we really need to first and foremost make sure that we had the infrastructure to manage this data. But ultimately, the reason why digital pathology is so exciting is because we are able to bring AI into these workflows. And it's already touching so much of pathology today and has been for years. We're in the very early days of use of this technology for kind of clinical workflows and things like that. But image analysis and AI has been used for kind of quantitative assessment of tissue in research settings for many years now. And a lot of what our customers are doing today in life sciences is using computer vision and AI, machine learning to quantify disease, quantify cells, quantify tissue, to predict outcomes using this image data. And so we've seen a pretty big pickup in those use cases, but we're still just barely scratching the surface for what this technology can do. I think the really cool thing about this market, as I've been in this for the past 5 to 7 years, is that there's more and more data available, and it's growing exponentially, especially more clinical data that we can use to both train and validate algorithms. 2, computation is increasing exponentially. And you see NVIDIA is investing very deeply in healthcare for this reason, because they recognize the ability for computation to transform healthcare. And 3 are AI capabilities have continued to open up the aperture for what we can do with this technology. And it's sort of just over the last year, as you kind of talked about at the beginning, there's been a pretty significant step function improvement in these capabilities. Everyone saw this with large language models and ChatGPT, but this is LLMs. You see, like Meta has put out some technology around image segmentation that's incredibly powerful, super generalizable, and it continues to open up the possibilities for what we can do with AI and with this data.
Fascinating. So at this point, the Proscia product, does it provide insights to the physician? What is the actual user experience?
Yeah. You know, I sort of liken it, I talked about kind of Google Drive at the beginning. When you think about the workflow for Concentriq for research, it's kind of like Google Drive for scientists and pathologists, and Concentriq DX is sort of like Gmail.
Okay.
Maybe both of them are like Google Drive combined with Google Maps, the viewing part of it, or Gmail combined with Google Maps. So what do I mean by that? You know, you imagine you're a pathologist. Pathologists today, our customers, they spend more time in Concentriq than they would in Gmail, right? They live and breathe Concentriq, and they're going through their work list just like they would, emails, and they're viewing these cases that have been brought together within our software: patient information, images, case information. But then when things become, really interesting, is what we're starting to do is deliver both Proscia developed and even some third-party applications to those workflows that would allow the pathologist to have a prioritized work list so they can get, say, the melanoma cases out faster or the high priority cases out faster. And then once you're opening up a case, you can prioritize both the slides and the parts of those slides, the physical kind of the parts of the tissue that you want to pay attention to. And that's really important because you think about, prostate cases or breast cases, there's a very, large geography of tissue that a pathologist has to sift through. And so what AI is starting to be able to do is tell the pathologist, you should look here. Pay attention to here first. This is the area that's most relevant to this case. So the pathologist can start to become more efficient in their workflows, and also, miss fewer relevant parts of the tissue, and hopefully improve quality as well. And so those are some of the first algorithms that we're starting to see impact clinical workflows. We're also seeing how some algorithms that have been integrated into our product allow the pathologist to quantify special stained tissues. So think about in breast cancer, you're going to stain this for ER, PR, and HER2, three important stains for breast cancer, and you're looking for the expression of certain proteins or genes in these immunohistochemistry stained slides. And what the AI can do is quantify the expressions of those and make it really easy for the pathologist to say, well, it's X% positive, X% strong positive, X% weak positive. These are the types of tasks that pathologists have to do manually that can be significantly automated and more precise using AI machine learning. So we're starting to see those types of things. I think over the next few years, what we expect is that there will be more companion diagnostics and precision medicine biomarkers that make their way into these diagnostic settings. And that's what pharma is investing very deeply in, because these pharma companies are developing, novel therapies that are maybe relevant to only 5% of patients. And that's a great thing. Like, we don't want to be treating cancer with these blunt force therapies. We want to be treating the right cancers with the right treatments at the right time.
Yep.
But you need the right diagnostics to make sure that you're getting those treatments to the right patients. And that can be a very difficult thing to do with our current technology. But what AI can do is, AI can help the pathologist understand biology and candidacy for these therapies in a very precise way, and maybe even pick up on parts of the biology that are signaling their candidacy for those drugs.
Fascinating. So if I'm understanding you correctly, one of the possibilities here is that in the diagnostics phase, AI can kind of create these like I would imagine right now there's just like general groups
Yeah.
of diagnoses, and AI can actually create these like hyper personalized specific
Yes.
diagnoses.
Yes, and many AI algorithms will work together as part of the pathologist's workflow. So you can imagine a pathologist in the future is looking more like an informaticist. They're deciding which image-based tests they want to run. They might have a panel of these tests, and these tests, unlike maybe their molecular pathology, their say maybe genomics, those are very expensive tests. These tests can be run in milliseconds and for pennies on the dollar. And that's really the promise of this, that the pathologist can put together a litany of computer generated information to be able to make a recommendation to the oncologist or whoever else is treating that patient based on all of this information that they're pulling together.
So I think the obvious initial question from anyone that's not aware is going to be, well, is AI right or more precise, more often than the doctor? And I think the answer obviously has to be yes. Yeah. Otherwise, you wouldn't be doing Proscia. Yeah. But my question to you is, you're operating in a space where you're the tolerance for risk and the tolerance for being wrong is zero.
Yeah.
Like you cannot point a pathologist in the wrong direction.
Yeah.
How do you build a business in that kind of environment?
Yeah. I think that's such a good question, and it's something that especially like a lot of software companies and technology companies in general struggle in healthcare for this reason, with many famous examples. People think about Theranos, right, which is in the pathology space, in blood testing in their case. It was pathologists who were kind of whistleblowers in that setting. And one of the things that we always have to remind ourselves as a healthcare company is that there are patients on the other side of our software. When we have dozens of engineers and all the other people that help bring this magical technology to scientists and pathologists, there is a patient whose life is dependent on us making sure that we do a really good job with that. And I think as challenging as, say, it can be for a company to deal with regulation or whatever, it's there for a very good reason. I think it's so important for companies to handle that with gravity, and that means making sure that technology is validated, and it means that it means having an attitude towards the way that we develop that technology that's different from tech companies. It's always a challenging thing to be able to thread that needle between the DNA of our business as a tech company and the DNA of our business as a healthcare
company.
Yeah.
People. Yeah.
And I'll also add, pathologists. People always ask about, does AI replace pathologists? I don't think AI ever replaces pathologists. I think the pathologist role becomes very different. AI will be good at performing specific tasks, even highly generalizable AI. Ultimately, these will be clinical applications that are approved for specific and relatively narrow indications of use. But this sort of menu of many AI-based tests together, like I was talking about earlier, orchestrated by a pathologist who has deep knowledge of pathology and of disease and can be a fail-safe in these settings, is ultimately how I think this space is going to pan out.
So I think there's an interesting problem that can arise in the middle ground, right? So we're talking about, which is another question that everyone's wondering about, like, well, is this going to replace the pathologist? And so you kind of just address that. But what this absolutely will do over the next, 20 years is it might remove the entire middle of the pipeline for talent from an education perspective, because an expert pathologist is somebody that has spent years picking through,
Yes.
understanding these tiny little nuances in color and in pixels and in all that kind of stuff. And so you take that away from them because you're like, you don't need to know this anymore.
Yeah.
The question is, do we stop turning out experts?
Yeah. Unfortunately, we already are. There are not enough pathologists in the world.
Okay.
The pathologist is the fastest declining specialty of medicine. And, that's at a time when the cancer patient population continues to grow, unfortunately. And so you have this widening gap between the pathologist workforce and the demand that we're expecting from that pathology workforce.
Yeah.
And that's created real problems. So you look at this is kind of rolled across the world, geography by geography. And what's interesting is that digital pathology adoption has kind of always followed a workforce challenge. Like that's usually the kick in the butt that these healthcare systems need in order to adopt new technology. So you look at the UK, for example, 3% of labs in the NHS have adequate staff to meet demand. And that's a relatively new problem over the past 3%. And turnaround times over the last 3 to 5 years have gone from days to now 6+ weeks, often many, many months. And that's, terrible for, say, a patient that maybe is waiting on a, let's say, skin cancer diagnosis. That patient might be, maybe it's, a relatively straightforward case. Maybe it's melanoma, very, very serious, right? And right now, without this kind of technology, you have no way of knowing until a pathologist goes in and looks at that case. That's a huge challenge for the healthcare system, and I think that AI is only going to help us here. To your point, could we stray away from the fundamentals of pathology in our education? I hope not. I hope that if anything, this technology not only makes it easier for us to teach pathology in academic settings, but also attracts more people to the space and opens up the role of the pathologist to become something much more in the age of precision medicine. I do think that over time, pathology will be less about basic pattern recognition and will be more about informatics and precision medicine.
Explain.
So I think that, for a pathologist in, say, 15 or 20 years from now, they're going to be the sort of base of knowledge that the pathologist is going to be drawing from will be less about, hey, what does this particular tumor type look like, and will be more about, in the context of this tumor and these signals that I'm getting, both visual signals and quantitative signals from computer, either what additional tests should I be ordering, and what sort of treatment should I be recommending based on these things that I'm seeing. And they're doing this today, right? Like the pathologist is not just looking at a case under a slide under a microscope and looking for tumor. That's already a small part of the pathologist's job. The pathologist is doing so much more than that. They're ordering, genetic tests. They're ordering additional stains on these slides, and those deal with this sort of physical or chemical medium. They're just going to have many, many more of these things that they have to order or think about or deal with, some of them which will be in the digital medium.
I think that's such a good insight. That was brilliant. Because I think that is the huge advantage that AI is going to bring to our society. It's like we've been trained to think in a certain way around technology for the last 30, 40, 50, whatever amount of years. And we think certain things are the norm. And we think that we want to be doing certain things of work. Like, small digression, but something that I've been explaining to people, the way that AI has already changed the wiring in my brain, the way I think about things when I use something like ChatGPT versus Google, is when you're searching the internet, we've been trained to think, I need to rack my brain to come up with the right keywords that I think is the way Google thinks about this thing. And when you prompt, the difference is you get straight to the end result. And you say, I want this objective. Now work your way backwards. And it completely rewires the way that you engage with technology.
Yeah.
And I think that it kind of takes, it has forced me to rethink, why should I want that from Google? Why should I want to have to sit here and think, all right, what are the best keywords to search for based on the way Google thinks about this, right?
Yeah.
And so to your point, like, it's almost like, I don't know if this is true, but I feel like back in the day, artists would, and maybe some still do, I don't know. But let's assume that artists like mix their own paint from the actual, from like sand, whatever, powder, right? And they had to mix the paint. And then this great technology comes along where you can just buy paint, pre-mixed paint. And it's like, oh, that's ruining the art. And it's like, no, now you can actually paint the canvas. You can take the tools and you can do something with it.
Well, another analogy in the art world is people were really upset when the camera was first invented because they thought that, well, gee, the camera is going to, obviate the need for great hyper-realistic painters. But what it did was it made painting into, you got the Picassos of the world, right? You got the abstract painters, and then you got, the amazing photographers of the world, and photography itself became a new art.
Yeah.
And I think we will see medicine evolve in a very similar way. It will open up new possibilities that we didn't expect.
Yeah.
I think that it's easy, many of the AI applications that most people first think about in pathology are basically take this analog process and then use AI to replicate that process. But actually where I think the most benefit is going to come from AI is things that were not even possible in the first place. Picking up on very subtle signals in the underlying biology represented in those pixels in the tissue that could help us find a patient that's a candidate for some new immunotherapy that we wouldn't even have that immunotherapy in the first place because those drugs would not make it to market because we'd have no way of finding out the right patients for those drugs. We'd still be dealing with chemotherapy or something else for that patient.
Yep.
And so those are the kinds of possibilities that are opened up with this technology. I think pathology becomes so much more interesting in that way.
Yeah. And by the way, to push back on my original question, I have found, and I think that it's not like I've done a mass case study on this, but I have found in my personal life, and I think the evidence is probably there, at least an equal chance, that you actually will be trained by using the AI. And so the concern about lacking that initial training, I think Grammarly, right? I have Grammarly, it fixed it. And I just learned how to spell better.
Totally.
And like better punctuation, better grammar. Like I didn't forget how to spell. While I'm using it, it's programming on my brain because every time I have to click that thing. And so I think there's a very good chance that it actually has the opposite effect and helps accelerate training.
Totally.
Yeah. All right, let's talk about the business now. So this is your first startup, right?
Yeah, well, sort of. I guess my first venture-backed company, but my first business was like,
lemonade stands don't count. Okay.
No, lemonade stands don't count. When I was a kid, though, I was always building things and like thinking about businesses. And I always say like my first business was this thing called tape-to-disc.net. Basically, people would send me their VHS tapes, and I would convert them into DVDs. Never took off like Proscia did, but I've always been an entrepreneur.
How old were you when you were doing that?
Oh, geez, probably 7th grade, something like that.
Are you serious?
Yeah.
And people would mail their stuff to you?
People would
legacy box
and
today.
the most nerve-wracking stuff was the wedding videos. It's like I got one copy of this VHS, and
don't screw it up.
Don't screw it up.
Oh my goodness.
Fortunately, the only screw up I had was writing the names in the wrong order, and someone got upset with me.
That's
because
hilarious.
I didn't have those. I didn't have the proper,
structure to that.
Structure.
But it's funny. So you started digitizing photos
exactly
way on.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah.
Wow, that's cool. Okay, so building Proscia, getting funding, that journey. I mean, I'm sure now it's been, you said 5-7 years, something like that. There's been many ups and downs, but there's usually more volatile ups and downs in the beginning. Talk us through kind of the let's move to the founder, put on your founder hat.
Yeah, totally. To your point, this is my first time running a venture-backed company, and especially in healthcare, as a healthcare entrepreneur, I didn't really have much to stand on as a reputation or a track record. I think what it did for me and for my co-founders was it really forced us to kind of prove ourselves as founders in our traction. And so that was kind of part of our mentality really on. And that was like, it was very, very painful at the time. But it forced us to create a very kind of customer-centric view to what we did, because we knew that we always needed, customers in order to have traction, to be able to raise money and to be able to build the business that we wanted. And I think that's very much alive in our ethos today. But we found early on an investor that took a bet on our business when we were very young and had no track record. We raised our seed round back in 2016, and then a year later had raised our Series A. Once we started getting some real customers that were paying real money for this. Obviously today we've raised about $80-something million. We most recently a Series C, but that was a very bumpy journey along the road.
If you could give yourself advice starting out, would you go the same route or would you try to bootstrap?
Yeah, I think the type of business that we're building is truly a venture-backed business. I think if I was talking to an entrepreneur, I would be these days, much more measured in how I'd recommend that maybe they take on venture capital. Taking on funding can be both a good thing in that it gives you the firepower to kind of invest in future growth, but it also totally changes the profile of the company. I think I would be, especially in the days like 3 years ago, et cetera. A lot of times what I saw, I think I, like many entrepreneurs, got caught up in the fundraising as the goal, as opposed to growth and customers as the goal. And I think that's like, we have to remind ourselves all the time that at the end of the day, it's about the customers, it's about the product and the value that product gives to customers, and the money is just an input to that equation. And that input can be a bigger input, it can be a smaller input, and it comes with advantages and disadvantages.
Yeah. Good advice. So let's talk about the future. You mentioned that you guys are really just on the beginning of the hockey stick from a technology and a growth perspective. What does the future have in store for Proscia? You said earlier you don't necessarily foresee the technology replacing pathologists. So what are kind of some of the goals?
We're really lucky today to have an amazing customer footprint with some of the largest pharma companies and CROs in the world using our platform, and a growing cadre of diagnostic labs that are using our platform. We've got an amazing team behind this. We've got amazing partners like Siemens and Agilent who are helping us get that technology to market alongside their broader product portfolios and with their amazing sales, distribution, and support teams. When I think about, say just 3 years from now, pathology will be well beyond that tipping point towards being fully digital. We will be in the diagnostic use of digital pathology for something like 1 billion slides created for diagnostic purposes per year. 600 million plus will be digital. And that's just not me saying that as a biased entrepreneur. I think when you talk to most labs, they're saying, I'm going to do this in the next 3 years if I haven't already. And if you talk to most analysts, they're saying, yes, it's probably the next 3 years that they will be fully digital. And that's like, even that is just the beginning. So the next few years, we are very, very focused on giving these labs the best technology in the world, the best software in the world, to move from a microscope-based discipline to an image-based discipline. And over time, we'll continue to give them more AI applications that we develop and that our partners develop, and maybe that they develop. into their workflows. Taking a step back though, like at the end of the day, it's not about moving from microscope to monitor. It's about a totally new way of thinking about pathology and rewiring the discipline to a data-driven or computational discipline. I think when you look at those, say, billion slides that are created for diagnostic purposes every year, each of which contains a gigabyte of information telling some story about a patient's cancer that would otherwise be sitting on a shelf collecting dust, doing nothing for us, that's a tremendous amount of data that we can learn from. That can help us identify patients that are candidates for clinical trials or candidates for new drugs, that can help fuel new research or a deeper understanding of disease. Biology is incredibly complex, and it takes a ton of data and a ton of computation to be able to decipher those complexities of biology. But I think the key to that lies in pathology. It lies in the tissue. It lies in the disease. It lies in the cells. And over time, what we hope as a business is that we can be the platform where all of that data lives across a huge ecosystem of pathology laboratories and life sciences organizations that want to understand that disease better, and can use computation and bring those computational tools to our customers to help them do that.
That's awesome. Yeah, this is the future, and you're a strong part of it. So, David, it's awesome to be here and kind of see some of the stuff at work and kind of see the team. And I wish you tremendous continued success in your.
Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you
stuff,
for coming in.